break laws on a day-to-day basis. Do you think it's acceptable to do so if it's in the national interest?
Do we all break laws on a day-to-day basis? Oh, David, do you have personal experience of that?
Forgetting to indicate traffic laws, we all break a small law now and again. As long as we can justify it.
What? Are you in the law business for some? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I'm a police officer.
Oh, I see. Oh, marvellous. Right. Well, look, James Clay, I guess I'm going to come to you. I mean, Boris Johnson yesterday was saying the Supreme Court is wrong. I mean, British jails are full of people who think the verdict is wrong.
Yeah, well, there's
what
lots
makes
of
Boris
people...
Johnson so different?
No, he's not unique. There are lots of people who by definition, thought the Supreme Court judgment was wrong. There's everyone that argued against it, so our lawyers argued against it. The Lord Chief Justice came to a different conclusion, so he clearly thought...
They were the highest judges in the land.
Oh, yes, but...
So they are the ultimate arbiters.
Oh, yes, and we absolutely respect the judgment that they made. But, as I say, I disagree with it. The Prime Minister disagreed with it. The Lord Chief Justice disagreed with it. The Master of the Rolls.
The Lord Chief Justice didn't. No, they didn't.
Bench division, because
stop saying that. That's not true.
Because they came to...
That's not true, James. That's not true. Because the three judges in the High Court did not discuss the case. What they said was that they couldn't get over the justiciability barrier, therefore referred it up to the High Court. They said it had merit and referred it up to the Supreme Court. So they never actually discussed the case and said it wasn't a case that was worth discussing. And that's really important.
Oh, no,
So that's what happened.
So the Supreme Court... the Supreme Court came to a judgment. We absolutely respect that judgment, which is why the House of Commons sat this week. This is why we came back, because we absolutely respect the judgment. Respecting and disagreeing, and this goes to the point, the broader point that we're making, is you can disagree and maintain respect, and that's our position. We respect the judgment, we will abide by the judgment.
You respect it, but you reject it.
No, we disagree with it. No. And this is really important. We absolutely respect it, which is why we've returned and which is why we abide by the decision. It is completely legitimate to disagree with a judgment, but also comply with it, and that's what's happening.
Can I just ask you about something that's breaking this evening, actually, just before we came on air, which is in terms of David's question, breaking laws. There's obviously the Benn law now, which... would require the government to either get a deal by October 31st, and if it doesn't have a deal and Parliament doesn't accept no deal, an extension has to be requested. Now, John Major was talking this evening, saying that there may be a way around this, and that the government may, in fact, try to bypass statute law by... I mean, it's pretty involved, folks, I've got to tell you, but by passing an order of council to suspend the Benn Act. Can you rule that out?
There is no such thing as the Benn Act, and we were talking about
that particular law. Can you rule out what John Major is suggesting as a way around it?
So the Prime Minister was criticised in questions earlier for using a shorthand. The EU Withdrawal No. 2 Act, which is the one you're referring to, which the Prime Minister described as a surrender act for the...
No, we've done all that. We've done all that. I'm asking very specifically...
The Prime Minister has been clear. The Prime Minister has been clear that he and government abides by the law, but he's also been clear...
By that particular law?
Yeah, well, by all laws.
Right, OK. And this suggestion that John Major's making tonight, and it's getting a lot of traction in the news, that the government may seek to bypass that law by passing an order of council to suspend it until after 31st October, that's not going to happen.
I'm not going to discuss how we're going to progress through this. No, I'm not going to discuss, because...
So it could happen?
No, and I tell you why. I tell you why, because what we have seen in Parliament is people bending conventions, stepping outside standing orders, making up new procedures on the hoof in order to prevent Brexit being delivered in the face of the largest electoral event in our country's history. And what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to talk through how the government intends to discharge its business, knowing full well that there are a whole load of people who will try and distort every procedure that we have in British politics to try and prevent that. And hopefully people will understand why I'm a little bit reticent as explaining exactly how other people will try and prevent the government discharging its duty.
Reticent to rule it out, yes.
Firstly, I think it's the position that we started, and that's that I'm sure there are people in this room today who think we have some laws that are sensible. I'm sure there are people that think we have other laws that are not so sensible. But we are all expected to comply with the law.
And we will.
Now, the issue that arises here is that it cannot be the case that Boris Johnson is treated in a different way from the rest of us, that he can choose to defy the law when he wants to, but that doesn't apply to anybody else. Like everyone in this room, he should respect the rule of law. He should comply with the Act of Parliament that's been passed. And I mean, what James is saying that he won't rule out using an ordering council procedure to defeat the statutory purpose of the bill is quite extraordinary. And if the government gets into that position, our constitutional crisis will be all the graver.
Now, what I said is I'm not going to discuss. What I made clear is that the Prime Minister and the government will abide by the law.
Adam.
They're called Henry VIII powers, aren't they? I mean, so yeah, essentially. Yeah. I mean, so that's what we're going back to, folks. Okay, before the sort of parliamentary democracy kind of became the fundamental principle of a constitution. Look, I think it's important that we emphasise, of course, the central fact in our constitution that actually nobody, be they so high, is above the law. And actually, that includes the Prime Minister. The government actually is also itself subject to legal restraints because the opposite of that, of course, is tyranny or anarchy, right? So it's part of our constitution. We have a balanced constitution. We have Parliament there. We have, obviously, the executive and then the courts working in tandem so we can actually have a proper system based on the rule of law. And, I mean, essentially, I welcome the core decision that the court made really was that you can't have a system of parliamentary democracy and give an unfettered right to the government to actually suspend Parliament indefinitely. Yeah? So there has to be a reasonable limit. If it was a prorogation of 5 or 6 days, the average, then that would have been reasonable. You go beyond that, and particularly when you don't provide a good reason for that, then obviously then you are beginning to suspend Parliament in a way that prevents Parliament doing its job. So I think, take Brexit out of it, right? There will be other issues in the future where you will have different sympathies maybe. If you didn't agree with the effect of this in the short term politically, we should all be glad of the fact that we live in a country where democratic principles and the rule of law at the heart of what happens, because that isn't true in many, many other parts of the world.
There are lots of hands up. I just want to get round a few of you. Yes, the man there in the check shirt.
You say Boris Johnson respects the Supreme Court ruling, but he's proven time and time again that he doesn't really respect anything. He doesn't respect the rule of law. Well, in what part of that Circus Act that he put on yesterday was he respecting the ruling of the Supreme Court?
By virtue of the fact we're in Parliament, was respecting the outcome.
James, I'm going to get
The
round
Speaker told him he had to come back. He didn't choose to come back.
Okay.
He was made to fly back from New York, to be there, to be held accountable for the things that he's trying to do.
Let me just get round a few of the audience here. Yes, the man there in the grey shirt, in the striped shirt.
Isn't the law being used to vitiate the result of the referendum?
The man in the T-shirt at the back there.
You talk about respect and you talk about obeying laws and following laws, yet no one is respecting the law that said 17.4 million people voted Brexit. None of you are respecting that.
And Gina Miller, we've no idea whether this Privy Council monarchy, whatever it is, I hadn't heard of it, I have to be honest, before this evening, whether or not the government may do that. But if there's nothing unlawful about it, why shouldn't they?
Well, they shouldn't. If I could just...
Yeah, but why
answer
shouldn't
the
they?
gentleman.
Why shouldn't
No. This is so difficult because we have an unwritten constitution, and as long as they're within the law, there's nothing wrong with that. And this is the whole thing. I hear people up in arms, MPs up in arms, because they're saying, oh, Boris might prorogue again. Well, if he does it legally, he's allowed to prorogue Parliament before a Queen's speech, as long as it's 4 or 5 days or 6 days or however many days that it... So as long as he's acting within the law, what I would wish, I hoped... When, if I hadn't taken this action, MPs wouldn't have been back where they should be, doing the job we pay them to do. But I have to say, this amount of time and effort I hear being expelled in trying to find ways out of things and trying to find really ancient tools. And why don't they use that time and effort into trying to get the deal going to Europe? Use your energy in a different way with the time we've got left.
And a bit more from the audience. Yes, the man there.
Surely there was 520-odd MPs voted for the referendum. So once the referendum result came in and 17.4 million people voted to leave, surely that is the law, because it's our parliament, and you MPs should have acted on that. And we wouldn't be in this position now when everybody's arguing.
Can
We'd
I
have been out
answer
in
this
Europe
question?
and that would have been
Briefly,
done.
Gina, because we've heard from you
The two
already.
gentlemen, just together, because actually this idea that the MPs are not doing anything, the MPs voted to trigger Article 50. They then voted to pass the Withdrawal Act. Then there is a Withdrawal Act in place in 2018. So they've actually passed 3 bits of legislation to enact the referendum, and they're now having to go towards the last bit of this. So this idea that they're acting, I don't understand. You have to look at what they've been trying to do. And this idea that MPs are trying to frustrate, what they're doing... No, they're discussing... I'm sorry, but...
And you're not helping.
Well, that's your opinion. That's your opinion. That is your opinion, but I thought we were going to bring back everything to our lords and our courts, and they were going to be the ones who decided everything.
Surely, because the MPs couldn't decide about staying in Europe. So they asked us...
Well, they haven't got to the end yet. So.
They asked us what our opinions were.
Yeah.
We voted to leave.
But I'm saying that
End
they
of
carried
sports.
on doing that, though.
End of
We
sports.
haven't got to the end yet.
No, because all you lot don't want us to get to the end.
Well,
we
I'm
shouldn't
not
be
an
there
MP.
now. We should be out of Europe.
Well, if they got... I'm not the MP, so I'm not in Parliament.
Okay,
they have
well,
to
let's-
do...
No, but you were stopping us doing it.
No, I haven't. I've made sure it's legal.
No, what's legal?
Oh, I have.
Okay.
Because under Article 50, if it doesn't comply with our constitutional requirements, we will be actually contravening international law.
Would you have done it the other way round?
Yes, I would have. Because I've been I've been a campaigner for 30 years. I've been doing this for a very long time, keeping tabs on what's going on. This is not just overnight.
If it was a Remain government and a Brexit parliament, you would have
Who
done
has
exactly the
tried
same.
to break the law?
You would have done
Yes.
exactly the same.
I've been doing this 10 years ago. I've been doing it the whole time. Look at what the previous government 10 years ago. In the space of 1 year, they used secondary legislation 96 times to take away our rights, and there were letters being sent off to them all the time saying you can't do this with Henry VIII powers. So I've been doing this for a very long time.
Mark Reckitt.
In a democracy where laws are properly made and properly interpreted, of course we should obey the law. The problem we now have, and we've heard about this from the audience, is that people voted to leave the European Union. They were told they were being given the decision and the government would implement what you decided. But that hasn't been happened. Brexit is being blocked by people who don't like Brexit, by people who voted Remain and think their views are of greater value than the majority who voted to leave. And we are seeing in Parliament, I'm afraid, as James was saying, we're seeing the procedures of the House of Commons, the standing orders, abused. And frankly, we've had someone in the chair who has allowed his own personal preference for Remain to influence how he assesses and, frankly, breaks those standing orders. And that's how this Surrender Act was passed. And then we think about the interpretation of the...
John Bercow has also always insisted that he doesn't have a preference. That's what he says.
If you believe that, you'd believe anything. But laws also need to be properly interpreted, and we have a Supreme Court that came to a judgment which described by Lord Sumption, who retired from the court just 9 months ago and has made a career out of urging judicial restraint. But on this occasion, he said that the judgment was revolutionary, but he supported it. And unlike the justices, he's actually been quite open about some of his reasons and some of the background to that. He says that the referendum was misguided, and therefore he's pleased that the powers are being pushed back to Parliament because the 52% shouldn't be allowed to enjoy 100% of their victory. Parliament should ensure we stay in the EEA or in the Customs Union because of supposedly how narrow it was. Now, would he be saying that if it was the other way around? If Leave had lost, Remain had got 52%, would he be saying we should leave the European Union and perhaps go into the EEA to take account of that 48%? No, of course he wouldn't. He said that referendum was nothing more than a snapshot of
Yes, but he wasn't one of the 11 judges, Mark.
constitutional stuff.
Well, he wasn't one of the 11 judges.
Yeah, well, he was one of the judges on Gina's previous case.
Yes, but he wasn't on the one this
week. And in that case, he
so his opinion didn't count.
dismissed the tried and tested rules of statutory interpretation. In this case, there'd been a law passed to implement the Treaty of Lisbon. Article 49, called the Passerelle Clause, to allow treaties well that full process, it put restrictions on how the government could use that. But Parliament put no equivalent restrictions on Article 50. He threw away those rules and he interpreted it to rule in favour of Gina, against the government, and it's been the effect of putting a roadblock in the way of Brexit.
He's not in this trial.
I think his remark, he was in the previous trial, and I think his remarks in the media, given he only retired 9 months ago, are ill-advised because people may see it much more through the prism of Leave and Remain if you've recently retired justices saying the referendum was misguided.
Before we go any further, because I can see this is going to go backwards and forwards, I just need to tell you that next week we'll be in Wallasey. That's very important. Next week we'll be in Wallasey, and the following week we're in Beckenham with Thea Paphitis, who's a dragon, of course, on Dragon, BBC's Dragon Den. And if you want to be in the audience, and I can guarantee it will be lively if tonight's only to go by. If you'd like to be in the audience, call 0330 123 9988, or of course you can go to the Question Time website and you can follow the instructions there. Let's take another question from Jamie Jenkins.